The raindrops pelted against Aurora Walker's skin like tiny bullets as she knelt in the mud, her shoulders shaking with sobs that were drowned by the thundering storm. It was April 1876, and the unforgiving Montana Territory had just taken the last person she had left in this world. Her father's freshly dug grave was rapidly filling with water, the mound of dirt beside it turning to sludge that would soon slide back into the hole, erasing any evidence that Jonathan Walker had ever existed. Aurora's chestnut hair, usually neatly pinned, hung in soaked tendrils around her face, plastered to her cheeks and mixing with the tears that flowed freely. She didn't bother to wipe them away. What was the point? The rain would only replace them, just as surely as death had replaced her hopes for a future. "Pa," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What am I supposed to do now?" At 22, Aurora had known her share of hardship. After losing her mother to typhoid when she was just 16, she had stepped into the role of caretaker, helping her father run their small homestead. They had managed well enough together, despite the hardships of frontier life. But pneumonia had claimed him after a brutal winter, and now she was truly alone. She had no siblings, no relatives to speak of. The nearest town, Willow Creek, was 5 miles away, and though she knew most folks there, she had no close friends. Her father had been a quiet, private man who kept to himself, and Aurora had inherited his reserved nature. A crack of lightning illuminated the sodden landscape, followed by a roar of thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. Aurora didn't flinch. Let the storm take her too. What difference would it make? Miles away, Nathan Powell pulled his hat lower against the driving rain, cursing his luck. He'd been on the trail for 3 days, driving a small herd of cattle to his ranch north of Willow Creek. The unexpected storm had scattered his herd, and despite his best efforts, he'd lost track of at least 5 head. At 28, Nathan was no stranger to the harsh realities of ranching in the territory. He'd built his spread from nothing after the war, working as a ranch hand until he could afford his own land. Now, 5 years later, the Twin Pea Ranch was modest but growing, and he took pride in what he'd accomplished on his own. He spotted a lone figure in the distance, kneeling in what appeared to be the small cemetery on the Walker property. Nathan had known Jonathan Walker, not well, but enough to tip his hat when they crossed paths in town. News of the man's death had reached him a few days ago, and he'd meant to pay his respects, but the cattle drive had taken precedence. Something about the solitary figure in the rain tugged at Nathan's conscience. He knew Walker had a daughter had seen her from afar in town occasionally, but they'd never been properly introduced. The thought of her alone in this storm, mourning at her father's grave, stirred something in him. Nathan guided his horse toward the cemetery, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. As he drew closer, he could see her shoulders shaking with sobs. She was completely soaked, her dress mudded and clinging to her slender frame. "Miss Walker," he called out over the storm. Aurora didn't hear him at first, lost in her grief. It wasn't until his horse nickered that she startled, turning her face up toward the sound. Nathan was struck by the raw pain etched across her features. Her eyes, the color of summer sage, were red-rimmed and swollen from crying, yet still striking against her pale skin. Rainwater and tears mingled on her cheeks, running down her neck to disappear into the sodden collar of her dress. He dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby post before approaching her. "Miss Walker," he said again, gentler this time, "you shouldn't be out in this weather." Aurora stared up at him, struggling to place his face. She'd seen him in town. She thought the rancher with the property north of theirs. Powell, that was his name. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair peeking out from beneath his hat and eyes the color of the coffee her father used to brew every morning. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. Nathan crouched down beside her, mindless of the mud soaking into his trousers. "You're not fine," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're going to catch your death out here." The irony of his words wasn't lost on Aurora, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips. What difference would it make? Nathan's brow furrowed. He'd seen grief before too much of it during the war, but there was something particularly wrenching about her desolation. "It would make a difference to those who care about you," he said. There isn't anyone left, Aurora replied, her eyes returning to her father's grave. The rain seemed to intensify, sheets of water obscuring the world beyond a few feet. Nathan made a quick decision. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Let's get you inside and dried off. We can come back when the storm passes." Aurora looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the grave. The thought of leaving her father alone in the storm tore at her heart, but she knew he would scold her for sitting out in the rain like this. Practical to the end, Jonathan Walker would have no patience for such behavior. With a shaky breath, she placed her hand in Nathan's and allowed him to help her to her feet. Her legs, stiff from kneeling for so long, buckled slightly, and Nathan steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "My house is just over the rise," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the small homestead visible through the rain. Nathan nodded. "I'll see you safely there." They walked in silence, Aurora leaning slightly against him as they navigated the muddy path. His horse followed behind, led by the reins in Nathan's free hand. By the time they reached the modest cabin, Aurora was shivering violently, her lips tinged with blue. "Do you have dry clothes?" Nathan asked as they stepped onto the porch. Aurora nodded, fumbling with the door latch with trembling fingers. Nathan gently moved her hands aside and opened it for her, then quickly tied his horse to the porch railing before following her inside. The cabin was neat but spare, with a small sitting area and kitchen combined in the main room. A closed door presumably led to a bedroom. A fire burned low in the hearth, providing minimal warmth. "You need to change," Nathan said, moving to stoke the fire. "I'll build this up while you do that." Aurora stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly aware of the impropriety of having a man she barely knew in her home while she was alone. But she was too cold and exhausted to protest. With a nod, she disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Nathan busied himself with the fire, adding logs until it blazed warmly. He removed his dripping coat and hat, hanging them on hooks by the door. His shirt was damp but not soaked through thanks to his heavy coat. He ran a hand through his dark hair, wondering what he was doing here. He'd meant only to check that she was all right, perhaps escort her home, but now he felt responsible for her in some indefinable way. When Aurora emerged from the bedroom, she had changed into a simple blue dress, her wet hair combed back and braided loosely. Some color had returned to her cheeks, but her eyes remained haunted. "Thank you for the fire," she said, her voice small but steadier than before. "You're welcome." Nathan gestured to a chair near the hearth. "You should sit and warm yourself." Aurora hesitated for a moment before doing as he suggested. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," she said, the social niceties her mother had instilled in her surfacing automatically. "I'm Aurora Walker." "Nathan Powell," he replied with a slight nod. "I own the Twin P ranch north of here. I knew your father slightly. He was a good man. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Aurora stared into the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He was all I had left." Nathan pulled another chair closer to the fire and sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Do you have family elsewhere who can help?" Aurora shook her head. "No, my mother died 6 years ago. There's no one else." "What will you do now?" he asked gently. It was the question that had been haunting her since her father fell ill. "I don't know," she admitted. "Try to keep the homestead going, I suppose." Nathan frowned. "Alone, that's a tall order for anyone, let alone a woman," Aurora finished, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "I've been helping my father run this place for years. I know what I'm doing." "I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Walker," Nathan said, raising his hands slightly in a placating gesture. "But even the most experienced rancher would struggle to manage alone." "It's not about being a woman, it's about being one person trying to do the work of two or more." Aurora's shoulders slumped, the brief spark of anger fading as quickly as it had appeared. "I know," she whispered, "but what choice do I have? This land is all I have left of my family." Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. Nathan watched as Aurora stared into the flames, her profile delicate but marked by a strength he admired. She had spirit, despite her grief. "When did you last eat?" he asked suddenly. Aurora blinked, trying to remember. "Yesterday, I think. I haven't had much appetite." Nathan stood. Do you mind if I fix something? You need to keep your strength up. Aurora looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. You cook. A small smile played at the corners of Nathan's mouth. I live alone, Miss Walker. If I didn't cook, I'd starve. For the first time, Aurora noticed the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and steady, like an oak in a storm. The pantry is through there, she said, gesturing toward the kitchen area. It's not well stocked, I'm afraid. I haven't been to town in a while. I'll make do, Nathan assured her, rolling up his shirt sleeves as he moved to the pantry. He returned with flour, some salted pork, and a few potatoes that had seen better days. Working efficiently, he set about preparing a simple meal of biscuits and gravy with fried potatoes. The domestic activity felt strangely intimate in the small cabin, with rain drumming on the roof and the fire crackling in the hearth. Aurora watched him work, a strange sense of gratitude washing over her. This man owed her nothing, yet here he was, cooking for her, making sure she was warm and fed. It had been so long since anyone had taken care of her that she'd forgotten what it felt like. When the food was ready, Nathan served it on 2 plates he found in the cupboard and brought one to Aurora. She took it with murmured thanks and began to eat slowly. The warm food revived her somewhat, bringing more color to her cheeks. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the storm providing a natural soundtrack to their meal. When they had finished, Nathan took the plates and washed them in the basin, setting them to dry on a cloth. The rain's letting up, he observed, glancing out the window. The downpour had indeed lessened to a steady drizzle. I should be getting back to check on my herd. Aurora nodded, a strange sense of disappointment washing over her at the thought of being alone again. Of course, thank you for your kindness, Mr. Powell. Nathan, please, he said, retrieving his coat and hat, which were still damp but no longer dripping. Nathan, she repeated softly. And I'm Aurora, he nodded, donning his hat. Aurora. He hesitated, then added, I'll check in on you in a day or two if that's all right. Make sure you're doing okay. Aurora wanted to tell him it wasn't necessary, that she could manage on her own, but the thought of seeing him again gave her a small spark of something to look forward to. That would be fine. Thank you. Nathan paused at the door, looking back at her. She was still sitting by the fire, her face partially illuminated by the golden glow of the flames. Something stirred in his chest, a protective instinct, perhaps, or something deeper that he wasn't ready to examine. Take care of yourself, Aurora, he said. And remember, you're not entirely alone. Willow Creek looks after its own. With that, he stepped out into the gray afternoon, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving Aurora staring after him, wondering why the cabin suddenly felt emptier than it had before he arrived. True to his word, Nathan returned 2 days later. Aurora was in the small vegetable garden behind the cabin, attempting to salvage what she could after the heavy rains. She straightened at the sound of hoofbeats, shading her eyes against the morning sun as Nathan rode up. Good morning, he called, dismounting with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Good morning, Aurora replied, brushing dirt from her apron. She was suddenly conscious of her appearance, hair escaping from its braid, smudges of soil on her hands and likely her face as well. She resisted the urge to smooth her hair or wipe her cheeks. How are you faring? Nathan asked, tying his horse to the hitching post. Well enough, Aurora answered, though in truth she had spent much of the past 2 nights lying awake, the silence of the cabin pressing in around her. The garden took a beating in the storm, but some of it might be salvageable. Nathan surveyed the muddy plot with a critical eye. Looks like your beans and potatoes should pull through, he observed. The tomatoes, though, beyond saving, Aurora agreed with a sigh. They were just starting to flower, too. I have some seedlings at my place that are nearly ready to transplant, Nathan offered. I could bring them by if you'd like. Aurora hesitated. She didn't want charity, but she also knew that, without the tomatoes, her winter stores would be meager at best. I would appreciate that, she said finally. I can pay you for them. Nathan waved away her offer. No need, I always start more than I can use anyway. He gestured toward the barn. How are your animals doing? The cow and the chickens are fine, Aurora said, but one of the horses is favoring his right foreleg. I think he might have stepped in a hole during the storm. Mind if I take a look? Nathan asked. Aurora led him to the small barn where her father's 2 workhorses were stabled. The older of the 2, a chestnut gelding named Buck, was indeed standing awkwardly, his right foreleg slightly raised. Nathan approached the horse slowly, murmuring soothing words as he ran his hands down the animal's leg. Buck shifted nervously but allowed the examination. Looks like a minor sprain, Nathan diagnosed after a few minutes. He needs rest and it wouldn't hurt to wrap it. He glanced at Aurora. Do you have any liniment? Aurora nodded, retrieving a small jar from a shelf. My father made this. It always seemed to help when the horses were stiff. Nathan opened the jar and sniffed the contents, nodding approvingly. Arnica and comfrey, your father knew his remedies. He applied the liniment generously to Buck's leg, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. I can show you how to wrap it properly. For the next hour, Nathan walked Aurora through the process of caring for the injured horse, then helped her with some of the heavier chores around the barn. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, comforting in its solidity and practical help, unsettling in the way it highlighted how alone she truly was. As they finished mucking out the stalls, Nathan leaned on the pitchfork, studying her. Have you given any thought to what you'll do long term? Aurora sighed, pushing a strand of hair from her face. I've been thinking about it constantly. I could sell the place, I suppose, but she looked around the small barn, her throat tightening. This was my parents' dream. They worked so hard for it, the thought of letting it go. You don't have to decide right away, Nathan said gently. But you should know that if you do choose to stay, you don't have to do everything alone. Neighbors help each other out here. Aurora gave him a small, grateful smile. I'm beginning to see that. They walked back to the cabin together, the midday sun warming their shoulders. Aurora invited Nathan to stay for lunch, and they shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and the last of her father's apple preserves. As they ate, Nathan told her about his ranch, how he'd started with just 50 acres and a handful of cattle after the war, slowly building it up to a respectable operation. He spoke of his plans to expand, his voice animated as he described the Hereford bulls he wanted to introduce to improve his stock. Aurora found herself drawn into his enthusiasm, asking questions and offering observations that seemed to please him. It had been so long since she'd had a conversation about something other than her father's illness or the daily grind of survival that she'd almost forgotten how enjoyable it could be. You know quite a bit about ranching, Nathan remarked, impressed by her knowledge. Aurora shrugged. My father believed in teaching me everything he knew, not just what was suitable for a lady. My mother wasn't always pleased about that, but she came around when she saw how much I enjoyed it. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Nathan said. She was, Aurora agreed, a fond smile touching her lips at the memory. Strong-willed but fair. My father used to say she could outwork and outthink most men, and he wasn't wrong. Sounds like you take after her, Nathan observed. Aurora ducked her head, oddly pleased by the comparison. I try to. After lunch, Nathan reluctantly announced that he needed to get back to his ranch. I've got men working on the north fence line today, he explained. Need to check their progress. Aurora walked him to his horse, suddenly dreading the return to solitude. Thank you for checking on me, she said, and for your help with Buck. I'll bring those tomato seedlings by tomorrow if that suits you, Nathan said, adjusting his saddle. That would be fine, Aurora replied, trying not to sound too eager. Nathan mounted his horse, then looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. You know, I'm having a problem with my ledgers, he said casually. Never been much good with numbers. My foreman's been handling it, but he's leaving at the end of the month. Your father mentioned once that you had a head for figures. I don't suppose you'd be interested in helping out a few hours a week. I'd pay fair wages, of course. Aurora blinked, surprised by the offer. Are you offering me a job out of pity, Mr. Powell? Nathan's eyes crinkled at the corners. Back to Mr. Powell, are we? And no, it's not pity, it's self-interest. I need someone who can keep my books straight, and from what your father said, you're more than capable. The fact that it might help you make ends meet while you decide what to do with your place is just a fortunate coincidence. Aurora studied his face, trying to determine if he was being truthful. His expression was open, without a trace of condescension or pity. "I would need to be home in time to tend to my animals," she said slowly. "Of course," Nathan agreed readily. 3 mornings a week would be plenty. You could ride over after your morning chores and be back by midday. It was a generous offer, and Aurora knew it. The extra income would be a godsend, allowing her to purchase supplies and perhaps hire occasional help for the heavier work around the homestead. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your offer. When would you like me to start? How about the day after tomorrow?" Nathan suggested. "I'll have everything ready for you." Aurora nodded, a small weight lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't a solution to all her problems, but it was a chance to catch her breath and plan her next steps without the immediate pressure of financial ruin. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, deliberately using his first name again. "I appreciate the opportunity." He tipped his hat to her, a smile playing at his lips. "Until tomorrow, Aurora." As she watched him ride away, Aurora felt something stir within her, not happiness, exactly, but perhaps the first tentative steps toward it. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had thought. The next day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring morning. Aurora rose early, as was her habit, and completed her chores with a sense of purpose that had been missing in recent weeks. She milked the cow, collected eggs from the henhouse, and changed the wrapping on Buck's leg, pleased to see that the horse was already showing signs of improvement. After a quick breakfast, she decided to visit her father's grave. The cemetery was small, just 4 graves in total. Her mother's, her father's, and those of her paternal grandparents who had died before Aurora was born. In time, she supposed, she would join them here, beneath the spreading branches of the old cottonwood tree. The ground was still soft from the recent rains, but no longer muddy. Aurora knelt beside her father's grave, which was now properly filled and marked with a simple wooden cross. She had yet to arrange for a proper headstone, but that would come in time. "I met Nathan Powell properly, Pa," she said quietly, running her fingers over the freshly turned earth. "You mentioned him a few times, I remember. He's been very kind." She paused, smiling slightly. "And you were right, he does need help with his ledgers. I'm going to work for him a few days a week." The one-sided conversation brought her a measure of comfort. She told her father about Buck's injury, about the garden, about her plans to preserve the homestead if she could. By the time she heard the approach of hoofbeats, she felt more settled than she had in days. Nathan arrived with a wooden crate secured to his saddle, containing a dozen healthy tomato seedlings. He dismounted, his eyes taking in her improved appearance. The dark circles beneath her eyes had faded somewhat, and though she was still thin, her posture was straighter, more determined. "Good morning," he greeted her. "You're looking better today." "I feel better," Aurora admitted. "I visited my father's grave earlier. It helped, I think." Nathan nodded in understanding. Sometimes speaking to them, even knowing they can't answer, brings a kind of peace. Aurora looked at him curiously. "You sound like you speak from experience." A shadow passed over Nathan's features. "My younger brother died at Shiloh. I was there, but couldn't reach him in time." He shook his head slightly, as if dispelling the memory. "It was a long time ago." Aurora wanted to ask more, to understand this glimpse into his past, but she sensed his reluctance to dwell on it. Instead, she gestured to the crate. "Are those the seedlings?" Nathan seemed grateful for the change of subject. "Yes. They're a bit leggy from being in the crate too long, but they should perk up once they're in the ground." Together, they worked in the garden, preparing the soil and carefully transplanting the tomato seedlings. Nathan showed Aurora how to create small wells around each plant to catch rainwater, and how to fashion simple supports from sticks to keep the plants upright as they grew. The physical labor was satisfying, and Aurora found herself enjoying Nathan's company more than she had expected. He was knowledgeable without being condescending, and he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions and ideas for the garden. As they worked, they talked about crops and cattle, about the town of Willow Creek and its inhabitants, about books they had read and places they had seen. Nathan had traveled more extensively than Aurora, having fought in the war and then worked his way west afterward. His descriptions of New Orleans and St. Louis captivated her, feeding a hunger for knowledge of the world beyond Montana territory that she had long suppressed. "Have you ever thought of traveling?" Nathan asked as they finished the last of the planting. Aurora sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When I was younger, I dreamed of seeing San Francisco. My mother had a cousin there who sent us letters describing the city, the bay, the buildings, the diverse people. It sounded magical." "Why didn't you go?" Nathan asked, genuinely curious. Aurora shrugged. "Life happened. My mother fell ill, then died. My father needed me here." She looked around at the small homestead. Dreams have a way of getting set aside when reality comes calling. Nathan studied her face, struck by the quiet resignation in her voice. "Dreams can be postponed," he said gently, "but they don't have to be abandoned entirely." Aurora met his gaze, surprised by the understanding she found there. "Perhaps," she conceded, "but for now, my reality is here." They finished their work in companionable silence, then washed up at the pump before sharing a light lunch on the porch. The day had grown warm, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from the nearby meadow. "I should get going," Nathan said eventually, though he made no move to rise from his seat. "I have a new stallion arriving today from Denver." "That sounds exciting," Aurora said, genuinely interested. "What breed, Morgan?" Nathan replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Best all-around horse there is, in my opinion. Strong enough for work, fast enough for pleasure riding, and intelligent to boot." "My father would have agreed with you," Aurora said with a smile. "He always said Morgans had more sense than most people he knew." Nathan laughed, a rich, warm sound that Aurora found herself wanting to hear again. "Your father was a wise man." As he stood to leave, Nathan hesitated, then said, "There's a social at the church this Saturday evening. The whole town will be there. You should come." Aurora's smile faded slightly. "I don't think I'm ready for that kind of gathering yet." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. It's too soon. But when you are ready, the invitation stands. You shouldn't isolate yourself entirely." Aurora walked him to his horse, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Thank you for the seedlings," she said, "and for your help planting them." "My pleasure," Nathan replied, mounting his horse. "I'll see you tomorrow morning at the ranch. Around 9, Aurora nodded. "I'll be there." As Nathan rode away, Aurora found herself watching until he disappeared from sight, a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety swirling within her at the thought of tomorrow's appointment. The next morning, Aurora rose even earlier than usual, determined to complete all her chores before riding to the Twin Pea Ranch. She had chosen her clothing carefully, a practical dark blue skirt and white shirtwaist that were neat and presentable without being too formal for ranch work. The ride to Nathan's property took about 40 minutes at a steady pace. Aurora had saddled her mare, Penny, while leaving Buck to rest his injured leg. The morning was beautiful, with clear skies and a crispness to the air that would burn off by midday. As she rode, Aurora found herself admiring the landscape, the rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, the distant mountains still capped with snow, the occasional cluster of pines providing welcome shade. The Twin Pea Ranch was larger than she had expected. A substantial 2-story house stood at the center of the property, with a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse arranged nearby. Fields of hay stretched to the east, while cattle grazed on the hillsides to the west. It was a well-established operation, far more extensive than her family's modest homestead. As Aurora approached, she saw Nathan emerge from the barn, shading his eyes against the morning sun as he watched her ride in. He was dressed in work clothes, denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and worn boots. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Right on time," he called as she drew closer. Aurora dismounted, tying Penny to the hitching post. "Good morning," she greeted him, suddenly nervous now that she was actually here. "Come inside," Nathan said, gesturing toward the house. "I've got everything set up in the study." Aurora followed him up the porch steps and into the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, not lavishly furnished, but clean and well-appointed, with good, solid furniture and a few touches that spoke of care and attention. A colorful woven rug covered the plank floor of the sitting room, and landscape paintings hung on the walls. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with a variety of volumes that made Aurora's fingers itch to explore them. "This is lovely," she said, genuinely impressed. Nathan looked pleased. "Thank you. I've been adding to it bit by bit over the years. The study is through here." He led her to a small room off the main sitting area. A sturdy desk occupied the center of the space, with ledger books and papers stacked neatly upon it. A large window overlooked the front of the property, providing ample natural light. "This is where I keep all the ranch records," Nathan explained, pulling out the chair for her. "Breeding logs, purchase and sale records, expenses, income, everything. My foreman, Ellis, has been keeping the books for the past year, but as I mentioned, he's moving on at the end of the month." Aurora seated herself at the desk, running her fingers lightly over the leather-bound ledgers. "What exactly would you like me to do? For today, I thought you could familiarize yourself with the system Ellis has been using," Nathan said. "It's straightforward enough, but every bookkeeper has their own way of organizing things. Then, if you have suggestions for improvements, I'm all ears." Aurora nodded, already opening the main ledger to study its organization. "And where will you be while I'm working?" "I'll be around the property most of the morning," Nathan replied. "The new stallion arrived late yesterday and I want to get him settled. If you need anything, just ask one of the hands to fetch me." Left alone in the study, Aurora immersed herself in the ranch's financial records. The system was indeed straightforward, if a bit haphazard in places. Ellis had been diligent but not particularly systematic. Aurora could see several ways to improve the organization and clarity of the records. She worked steadily for several hours, making notes and reorganizing some of the information into a more logical format. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice Nathan's return until he knocked lightly on the open door. "How's it going?" he asked, stepping into the room. Aurora looked up, blinking as she refocused on her surroundings. "Very well, I think. Your foreman kept good records, but there are a few changes I would suggest to make the information more accessible." Nathan moved to stand beside her, looking over her shoulder at the notes she had made. He was close enough that Aurora could smell the scent of horses and fresh air that clung to him, along with something else, a subtle, masculine scent that was uniquely his own. She found it oddly distracting. "These look like excellent suggestions," Nathan said, his voice close to her ear. "Especially the separate ledger for breeding records. That makes a lot of sense. It would make it easier to track lineages and plan future breeding pairs," Aurora explained, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her stomach at his proximity. Nathan straightened, moving to lean against the edge of the desk. "You have a good mind for organization, Aurora. I'm glad you agreed to help." "It's interesting work," she admitted, "and I've always enjoyed working with numbers. They're reliable, unlike people." Nathan asked with a small smile. Aurora returned the smile, albeit somewhat ruefully. "People are certainly more complicated." "That they are," Nathan agreed. He glanced out the window, noting the position of the sun. "It's nearly noon. I thought you might join me for lunch before you head back." Aurora hesitated only briefly. "That would be nice, thank you." Nathan led her to the kitchen at the back of the house, a spacious room with a large wood-burning stove and a solid table in the center. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted, "but I can manage sandwiches." "I can help," Aurora offered, moving to wash her hands at the pump sink. Together, they prepared a simple meal of cold ham sandwiches and sliced apples. There was something companionable about working alongside Nathan in the kitchen, passing items back and forth, moving around each other with an ease that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. As they ate, Nathan told her about the new stallion, his enthusiasm evident as he described the animal's bloodlines and potential. Aurora found herself drawn into his excitement, asking questions and offering observations that seemed to please him. "You should come see him before you leave," Nathan suggested as they finished their meal. "He's a magnificent animal." Aurora agreed readily, and after they had cleared away the lunch things, Nathan led her to the barn where the new stallion was stabled. The horse was indeed magnificent, a deep bay with a black mane and tail, standing at least 16 hands high. He watched them with intelligent eyes as they approached his stall. "His name is Midnight Commander," Nathan said proudly, but I just call him Commander. Aurora stood at her respectful distance, admiring the stallion's powerful build and alert expression. He's beautiful, she said softly. Would you like to meet him properly? Nathan asked, opening the stall door. He's got good manners for all his size and spirit. At Aurora's nod, Nathan led the stallion out of the stall and into the center aisle of the barn. He beckoned Aurora closer, showing her how to offer her hand for the horse to sniff. Commander stretched his neck toward her, his velvety muzzle tickling her palm as he investigated this new person. He likes you, Nathan observed as the stallion nudged Aurora's shoulder gently. Aurora stroked the horse's neck, marveling at the sleek power beneath her fingers. The feeling is mutual, she said with a small laugh. He's magnificent. Nathan watched her with the horse, struck by the gentle confidence of her movements and the genuine pleasure in her expression. There was something about Aurora Walker that drew him, a quiet strength that matched her outward fragility, an intelligence that shone through her reserve. He found himself wanting to know more about her, to understand the woman behind the composed facade. When will you begin breeding him? Aurora asked, interrupting Nathan's thoughts. Not until next spring, Nathan replied, focusing his attention back on the stallion. I want him well settled here first, and I'm still selecting the right mares to pair with him. They spent another half-hour discussing the horse and Nathan's breeding plans before Aurora reluctantly announced that she needed to get back to her homestead. Nathan walked her to where Penny was tied, helping her tighten the cinch before she mounted. Same time on Friday, he asked, looking up at her. Aurora nodded, settling into the saddle. I'll be here. Good, Nathan said simply. He stepped back, raising a hand in farewell as she turned Penny toward home. As Aurora rode away, she found herself looking forward to Friday with an eagerness that surprised her. It wasn't just the work, though she had genuinely enjoyed the challenge of organizing the ranch records. It was Nathan himself, his quiet confidence, his evident passion for his ranch, the way he listened to her ideas with genuine interest. It had been a long time since anyone had valued her thoughts and opinions the way he seemed to. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting, because after weeks of grief and isolation, connection with another person felt like water to parched earth. Unsettling, because she recognized the danger of becoming too attached to that feeling and to the man who evoked it. Aurora shook her head slightly, as if to clear it of such thoughts. Nathan Powell was her employer now, nothing more. The fact that she enjoyed his company was a pleasant bonus, but she would be wise to keep her emotions in check. After all, she reminded herself, she still had no clear plan for her future. Until she decided what to do with her father's homestead, any other considerations would have to wait. With that sensible resolution firmly in mind, Aurora urged Penny to a faster pace, eager to return home and tend to her animals before the heat of the afternoon set in. Friday came more quickly than Aurora had expected. The days between had been filled with work around the homestead, tending the garden, caring for the animals, mending fences, and 100 other tasks that demanded her attention. Buck's leg was improving steadily, and the tomato seedlings Nathan had brought were already perking up, reaching for the sun with renewed vigor. Aurora had also spent some time going through her father's papers, trying to get a clearer picture of their financial situation. What she found was sobering but not desperate. There were some debts, but nothing insurmountable. The homestead wasn't large, but it was productive enough to support one person modestly, especially with the supplemental income from her work at the Twin Peaks. Still, questions remained. Could she truly manage the place alone in the long term? Would it be wiser to sell and start fresh elsewhere? And if so, where would she go? These thoughts circled in her mind as she rode to Nathan's ranch on Friday morning, the familiar landscape passing almost unnoticed as she pondered her options. Nathan was waiting for her on the porch when she arrived, a cup of coffee in hand and a smile of welcome on his face. "Good morning," he called as she dismounted. "Coffee?" Aurora accepted gratefully, following him inside to the kitchen where a pot bubbled on the stove. The house was quiet, suggesting Nathan had been up for some time. "How are the tomato plants doing?" he asked, pouring her a cup and refilling his own. "Thriving," Aurora replied, warming her hands around the mug. The morning was unusually cool for late spring, and Buck's leg is much improved. He's barely favoring it now. Good news on both counts, Nathan said, leaning against the counter. I looked over the notes you left on Wednesday. Your suggestions for reorganizing the breeding records make a lot of sense. I thought you might start implementing some of those changes today if you're willing. Aurora nodded, pleased that he had taken her ideas seriously. I'd be happy to. They moved to the study, where Nathan had laid out fresh ledger books and the existing records. He watched as Aurora outlined her plan for transferring and reorganizing the information, nodding his approval. This will make it much easier to track bloodlines and plan future pairings, he observed. I wish I'd thought of it sooner. Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective, Aurora said, already beginning to copy information into the new format. Nathan seemed reluctant to leave her to work alone. He lingered in the doorway, watching as she bent over the ledgers, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. There was something compelling about her focus, about the careful precision of her handwriting as she transferred figures and notes. I should let you work, he said finally. I've got men breaking a new field today, and I should check their progress. Aurora looked up, offering a small smile. I'll be fine here. This will keep me busy for hours. Nathan nodded, still hesitating. I thought. That is, if you're not in a hurry to get back after you finish, I could show you more of the ranch. There's a spot by the creek that's particularly nice this time of year. Aurora was surprised by the invitation and by the slight nervousness in Nathan's manner as he extended it. I'd like that, she said softly. I don't have any pressing obligations at home today. Relief and pleasure crossed Nathan's face. Good, I'll be back around midday then. After he left, Aurora turned back to her work, but found her concentration slightly diminished by thoughts of the afternoon to come. There was no denying that she was drawn to Nathan, to his quiet strength, his evident intelligence, the care he took with his animals and his land. But she was still raw from her father's death, still uncertain about her own future. Was it wise to encourage whatever this was between them, and yet she couldn't bring herself to regret accepting his invitation. There was something about Nathan Powell that made her feel more alive than she had in weeks, months, even. Perhaps it was simply the novelty of new companionship after so much solitude, or perhaps it was something more specific to the man himself. Either way, she found herself looking forward to the afternoon with an anticipation that both excited and alarmed her. By the time Nathan returned shortly after noon, Aurora had made significant progress on the breeding records. 3 new ledgers were neatly organized by bloodline, with cross-references and notes that would make it easy to trace any animal's lineage and plan future breeding pairs. This is impressive, Nathan said, examining her work. You've accomplished more in one morning than Ellis did in a week. Aurora felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. It's satisfying work, she said simply. I enjoy bringing order to things. Nathan smiled, a warm expression that reached his eyes and made something flutter in Aurora's chest. Ready for that tour? He asked. I thought we could ride it's faster than walking, and I can show you more of the property that way. Aurora agreed, and soon they were mounted, Nathan on Commander, Aurora on a gentle mare named Daisy that Nathan had saddled for her, saying Penny deserved a rest. They rode side by side across the ranch, Nathan pointing out features of interest: the new hayfields he was developing, the spring-fed pond where his cattle watered, the stand of cottonwoods where he planned to build a larger barn next year. You have ambitious plans, Aurora observed as they rode. Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. I do. This land has potential that's barely been tapped. In 5 years, I hope to double the size of my herd and add another 100 acres to the west. And you'll manage all that alone? Aurora asked, curious about his vision for the future. A shadow crossed Nathan's face briefly. Not alone, ideally, he said after a moment. I've always imagined sharing this place with a family someday, a wife, children. The admission hung between them, charged with unspoken implications. Aurora felt her cheeks warm and looked away, focusing on the landscape ahead. There's the creek, Nathan said, clearly sensing her discomfort and changing the subject. We'll stop there for a while if that's all right. It's cooler by the water. The creek was a clear, bubbling stream that wound through a small stand of willows and cottonwoods. Dappled sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating shifting patterns on the ground and water. It was indeed cooler here, the air refreshing after their ride in the afternoon sun. Nathan helped Aurora dismount, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. He tied the horses where they could graze on the lush grass near the water, then spread a small blanket he had brought in his saddlebag on a grassy spot beneath the largest cottonwood. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he said as they settled on the blanket. "There's something about moving water that clears the mind." Aurora nodded in understanding. "We have a similar spot on our property, a small pond fed by a spring. My mother used to take me there for picnics when I was young." "Good memories, then," Nathan observed. "The best," Aurora agreed, a wistful smile touching her lips. "She would bring a book and read to me while we ate, poetry mostly. She loved Wordsworth and Keats." "Beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know," Nathan quoted softly. Aurora looked at him in surprise. "You know Keats," Nathan shrugged, a hint of embarrassment in his smile. "I read more than most would expect of a rancher. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She made sure my brother and I had an education that went beyond farming and ranching." "She sounds wonderful," Aurora said. "She was," Nathan agreed. "She died when I was 16, influenza. My father followed a year later. Heart failure, the doctor said, but I think it was grief as much as anything physical." Aurora's heart ached for the boy he had been, losing both parents so young. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Nathan nodded, his gaze on the flowing creek. "It was. But it taught me something important, that life is precious and unpredictable. You have to seize happiness where you can find it, because there's no guarantee of tomorrow." There was something in his voice, a depth of feeling that resonated within Aurora. She understood what he meant, had learned the same lesson through her own losses. And yet, the fear of more pain, more grief, made her hesitant to embrace that philosophy fully. "It's not always that simple," she said quietly. "Sometimes the fear of losing again makes it hard to reach for happiness in the first place." Nathan turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "I know," he said. "Believe me, I know. After my brother died at Shiloh, I thought I'd never let myself care deeply about anyone again. The risk seemed too great." "What changed?" Aurora asked, genuinely curious. Nathan was silent for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. "Time, partly," he said finally. "And the realization that a life without deep connections isn't much of a life at all. We're meant to care for each other, Aurora. It's what makes us human." The simple truth of his words struck her deeply. Since her father's death, she had been withdrawing, protecting herself from further hurt by isolating her heart. But in doing so, she was denying herself the very connections that might help her heal. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a whisper, looking down at her hands, "of caring, of losing, of being left alone again." Nathan reached out slowly, taking one of her hands in his. His palm was warm and calloused, the touch gentle but sure. "I know," he said simply, "but you're stronger than you think, Aurora Walker. I've seen it in everything you do." Aurora looked up at him, struck by the certainty in his voice and the warmth in his eyes. There was something happening between them, something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but couldn't bring herself to pull away from either. Before either of them could speak again, a distant rumble of thunder broke the moment. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving quickly in their direction. "We should head back," Nathan said reluctantly, releasing her hand. "That storm will be on us within the hour." They packed up quickly and mounted their horses, riding at a faster pace than before as the sky darkened behind them. The air grew heavy with the scent of impending rain, and the wind picked up, rustling through the grass and trees. They had just reached the main house when the first large drops began to fall. By the time they had stabled the horses, the rain was coming down in earnest, a heavy downpour that drummed on the barn roof and turned the yard to mud. "You can't ride home in this," Nathan said as they stood in the barn doorway, watching the deluge. "It's too dangerous, especially near the creek. The water rises quickly during storms like this." Aurora knew he was right, but the thought of staying at his ranch in his house made her nervous in ways she couldn't quite articulate. "Perhaps it will pass quickly," she suggested, though the dark, roiling clouds suggested otherwise. "Not likely," Nathan said, shaking his head. "This looks like it's settling in for a while. You'll stay for dinner, at least, and if it hasn't let up by then, you can take the guest room for the night." The practical logic of his suggestion was undeniable, but Aurora still hesitated. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," Nathan assured her, his voice gentle. "I'd worry if you tried to ride home in this. Besides, I'd welcome the company." There was something in his expression, a mix of concern and something deeper, that made it impossible for Aurora to refuse. "All right," she conceded. "Thank you." They made a dash for the house through the pouring rain, arriving on the porch breathless and laughing despite being soaked. Inside, Nathan built up the fire in the sitting room while Aurora stood nearby, shivering slightly in her damp clothes. "You should change," Nathan said, noticing her discomfort. "I have a sister-in-law in Denver who visits occasionally. She keeps some things here. I'm sure she wouldn't mind if you borrowed something dry." He led Aurora to a bedroom on the second floor, opening a wardrobe to reveal several dresses and other feminine garments. "Help yourself to whatever fits," he said. "I'll change as well and then start on dinner." Left alone in the room, Aurora selected a simple blue dress that looked close to her size. It fit well enough, though it was slightly loose in the waist and a bit short at the ankles. She combed her damp hair and rebraided it neatly, then made her way back downstairs. She found Nathan in the kitchen, already changed into dry clothes and busy preparing a meal. He looked up as she entered, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "That looks nice on you," he said simply. "Feel better now that you're dry." Aurora nodded, moving to join him at the counter. "Much. Can I help with dinner?" Together, they prepared a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and biscuits. The domesticity of the activity was both strange and comforting. Strange, because it had been so long since Aurora had cooked alongside anyone other than her father. Comforting because of the easy rhythm they fell into, working around each other as if they had done so for years. As they ate at the kitchen table, the storm continued to rage outside. Rain lashed against the windows, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the room, followed by rumbling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. "Looks like you'll be staying the night," Nathan observed as a particularly loud crack of thunder punctuated his words. "The creek will be too high to cross safely, even if the rain lets up." Aurora nodded, acknowledging the reality of the situation. It seems so. A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal. Aurora found herself studying Nathan's face in the warm lamplight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he bent forward. He was handsome, yes, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that she found deeply appealing. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where the fire had warmed the space to a pleasant temperature. Nathan poured them each a small glass of whiskey, which Aurora accepted with only slight hesitation. The amber liquid burned pleasantly going down, warming her from the inside out. They sat in comfortable chairs near the fire, the storm creating a cocoon of sound around the house that made their conversation seem more intimate, more private. Nathan told her stories of his early days on the ranch, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned, the satisfaction of seeing his hard work bear fruit. Aurora found herself sharing memories of her childhood on the homestead, of her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's practical teachings. As the evening wore on, Aurora felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The grief was still there, a constant ache beneath her breastbone, but it was less overwhelming than it had been. Here, in this warm room with this kind man, she could breathe more easily, could imagine a future beyond her loss. When a yawn escaped her, Nathan smiled gently. "You're tired," he observed. "I should show you to your room." Aurora nodded, reluctantly acknowledging her fatigue. The day had been long and emotionally taxing in ways she hadn't expected. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said as they climbed the stairs together. "And for understanding." Nathan paused at the top of the stairs, turning to face her. In the dim light of the oil lamp he carried, his expression was serious but warm. "You're not alone, Aurora," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. Whatever you decide about your future, you're not alone." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, brought unexpected tears to Aurora's eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to cry in front of him again. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood there for a moment, close enough that Aurora could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Something hung in the air between them, a possibility, a question unasked. Then Nathan stepped back slightly, gesturing toward the guest room. "Sleep well," he said softly. "I'll see you in the morning." Aurora nodded, moving past him into the room. "Good night, Nathan." As she closed the door behind her, Aurora leaned against it, her heart beating rapidly in her chest. She was not falling in love with Nathan Powell, she told herself firmly. It was too soon, too complicated, too risky. But even as she thought it, she knew she was lying to herself. The seed had been planted, whether she welcomed it or not. All she could do now was decide whether to nurture it or let it wither. With a sigh, she moved to the bed, her thoughts tumultuous as the storm that continued to rage outside. It was a long time before sleep claimed her, and when it did, she dreamed of rain and strong hands and eyes the color of coffee. Aurora woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the sound of birds singing outside the window. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world that sparkled in the morning light. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself to her surroundings before rising and dressing in her own clothes, which had dried overnight. Downstairs, she found Nathan in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. The domestic seen his tall frame bent over the stove, the scent of coffee and bacon filling the air stirred something in her that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that warmed his eyes. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Aurora admitted, moving to help him set the table. "The storm didn't keep me awake for long." They ate breakfast together, discussing the work Aurora would continue with the ranch records. Nathan mentioned that he needed to ride out to check on some cattle that might have been scattered by the storm, but he would be back by midday. "The creek should be passable by then," he said. "I can ride back with you to your homestead. Make sure you get home safely." Aurora nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Thank you. I should check on my animals as soon as possible." After breakfast, Aurora returned to the study while Nathan prepared for his ride. She worked steadily through the morning, finding satisfaction in the orderly arrangement of figures and notes. By the time Nathan returned, she had completed the reorganization of the breeding records and had started on a new system for tracking expenses by category. "This looks excellent," Nathan said, examining her work. "You have a real talent for this, Aurora." His praise warmed her, as did the use of her first name. In the short time they had known each other, they had developed a comfort with each other that usually took much longer to establish. They ate a light lunch together before preparing to leave for Aurora's homestead. The ride was pleasant, the air fresh and cool after the storm, the landscape vibrant with renewed life. They talked easily as they rode, discussing books they had read, sharing observations about the weather and the land, finding more common ground with each passing mile. When they reached the creek that marked the boundary between their properties, they found it still running high but no longer dangerous. They crossed carefully, their horses picking their way through the swift flowing water with practiced ease. As they approached Aurora's cabin, she felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. Relief to be home, to see that her property had weathered the storm with minimal damage. Regret that her time with Nathan was coming to an end, at least for now. They checked on the animals first. All were safe and accounted for, though the chickens were disgruntled at having been confined to the coop longer than usual. Buck's leg continued to improve, and he nickered a greeting when they entered the barn. "Everything looks good," Nathan observed as they completed their inspection. "The storm didn't do any serious damage that I can see." "No, we were fortunate," Aurora agreed, leading the way back to the cabin. On the porch they paused, an awkward moment stretching between them. Aurora knew she should invite him in for coffee at least. But something held her back, a sense that crossing that threshold together would mark a shift in their relationship that she wasn't sure she was ready for. Nathan seemed to sense her hesitation. "I should be getting back," he said, though he made no move to leave. "There's still plenty of daylight left to check on the rest of my herd." Aurora nodded, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. "Of course. Thank you for seeing me home safely." "It was my pleasure," Nathan replied, his voice warm. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Then Nathan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away if she chose, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering briefly against her cheek. "I'll see you on Monday," he asked, his voice low. Aurora nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. His touch, light as it was, had sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool breeze. Nathan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made her heart skip. "Until then," he said softly, stepping back. Aurora watched as he mounted his horse and rode away, raising a hand in farewell as he reached the edge of her property. Only when he had disappeared from sight did she enter the cabin, closing the door behind her and leaning against it, her thoughts in turmoil. She was falling for Nathan Powell. There was no denying it any longer. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Monday dawned clear and mild, a perfect late spring day. Aurora completed her morning chores with unusual efficiency, eager to be on her way to the Twin Pea Ranch. She had spent much of Sunday wrestling with her feelings for Nathan, alternately encouraging and suppressing them as her mood shifted. By morning, she had reached no firm conclusions, but had decided to simply let things unfold naturally, neither rushing forward nor holding back out of fear. As she rode toward Nathan's property, she rehearsed casual greetings in her mind, determined to maintain her composure despite the fluttering in her stomach. But all her careful preparations fled when she crested the final hill and saw smoke rising from the direction of the ranch house. Heart-pounding, Aurora urged Penny to a gallop, covering the remaining distance at a reckless pace. As she drew closer, she could see that it was not the house that was burning, but one of the outbuildings, the small smokehouse where Nathan cured meat for the winter. Flames licked at the wooden structure, and men were forming a bucket brigade from the well to the building, trying to prevent the fire from spreading to the nearby barn. Aurora dismounted quickly, tying Penny to a fence post well away from the commotion. She spotted Nathan in the center of the activity, directing the efforts of his ranch hands, his face streaked with soot and his shirt soaked with sweat and water. Without hesitation, Aurora joined the line of men passing buckets, taking a position between a young ranch hand she recognized as Caleb and an older man whose name she didn't know. If either was surprised by her presence, they didn't show it, accepting her help without comment as they focused on the urgent task at hand. For nearly an hour, they battled the flames. Aurora's arms ached from the repetitive motion of passing heavy buckets, and her dress was soaked and filthy, but she worked without complaint alongside the men. Finally, the fire was brought under control, reduced to smoldering embers that posed no further threat to the surrounding buildings. As the men dispersed to other tasks, Nathan approached Aurora, concern evident in his expression despite his obvious exhaustion. "You shouldn't have joined the bucket line," he said, though there was no reproach in his tone, only worry. "That was dangerous work." "I couldn't just stand by and watch," Aurora replied simply. "Besides, I'm stronger than I look." A tired smile crossed Nathan's face. "I'm beginning to see that." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of soot across his forehead. "The smokehouse is a total loss, but at least the fire didn't spread. Could have been much worse." "How did it start?" Aurora asked, accepting the clean handkerchief he offered to wipe her hands and face. Caleb was smoking some beef for the coming week. He stepped away for a moment and somehow the fire got out of control. Nathan shook his head. "The boy feels terrible about it. He's a good worker, just young and still learning." Aurora nodded, appreciating Nathan's understanding toward the young ranch hand. Many employers would have been far less forgiving of such a costly mistake. "Come inside," Nathan said, gesturing toward the house. We both need to clean up, and you look like you could use some coffee." In the kitchen, Nathan poured water from the reservoir into a basin, adding a kettle of hot water from the stove to warm it. "Ladies first," he said, stepping back to allow Aurora access to the basin. Aurora washed her hands and face, grateful to remove the worst of the soot and grime. The water in the basin turned gray with ash, and she grimaced apologetically. "I've ruined your washing water." "Easily replaced," Nathan assured her, emptying the basin out the back door and refilling it for himself. As he washed, Aurora took the opportunity to study him surreptitiously. Despite his evident fatigue, there was a vitality to him that she found compelling, a strength that went beyond the physical. Once they were both somewhat cleaner, Nathan prepared coffee while Aurora found towels to dry their hands and faces. The domesticity of the moment struck her again, this easy cooperation, this sharing of simple tasks. It felt right in a way that both comforted and frightened her. "Your dress is ruined," Nathan observed as they sat at the kitchen table with their coffee. "I'm sorry about that." Aurora looked down at her once blue dress, now stained with soot and water. "It's just a dress," she said with a shrug. "It can be washed, and if the stains don't come out, well, I have others." Nathan studied her face over the rim of his coffee cup. "You're a remarkable woman, Aurora Walker," he said quietly. "Most ladies of my acquaintance would be having hysterics after such an experience." Aurora smiled slightly. "I've never had much patience for hysterics. They don't accomplish anything useful." "No, they don't," Nathan agreed, returning her smile. There was something in his eyes, admiration, certainly, but something more as well, something that made Aurora's heart beat a little faster. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, both tired from the morning's exertions. When Aurora made a move to rise and begin her work in the study, Nathan stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "The ledgers can wait," he said. "You've done more than enough work for one day. Why don't you head home and rest? I can have one of the men ride with you if you're tired." Aurora shook her head. "I'm fine to ride alone, but are you sure about the ledgers? I don't mind continuing." "I'm sure," Nathan said firmly. "Besides, I need to oversee the cleanup and start planning to rebuild the smokehouse. I wouldn't be able to give you much attention today anyway." There was logic in his suggestion, but Aurora felt oddly reluctant to leave. The fire had demonstrated the unpredictability of life in a way that resonated with their conversation by the creek. None of them knew how much time they had not with the places they loved, not with the people they cared for. "I'll come back on Wednesday then," she said, rising from the table. "Unless you need help with anything before then." Nathan walked her to where Penny was tied, untying the mare and holding her steady as Aurora mounted. "Thank you for your help today," he said, looking up at her. "You didn't have to join the bucket line, but I'm grateful that you did. It showed character." Aurora felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning's exertion. "Anyone would have done the same," she demurred. "No," Nathan said simply. "They wouldn't have." He reached up to adjust her stirrups slightly, his hand lingering on her boot for a moment longer than necessary. "Ride safely, Aurora." As she rode home, Aurora reflected on the morning's events. The fire had been a stark reminder of the fragility of the lives they built, how quickly what they worked for could be reduced to ashes. It reinforced her growing conviction that life was too short and too uncertain to let fear dictate her choices. By the time she reached her homestead, Aurora had made a decision. She would continue to work for Nathan, continue to rebuild her life after her father's death, and she would allow herself to explore the feelings growing between them, wherever they might lead. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff, feeling the wind on her face and knowing that to truly live, she had to step forward into the unknown. Wednesday arrived with a gentle rain that pattered softly against the roof and windows of Aurora's cabin. It was not the driving downpour of previous storms, but a steady, nourishing rain that the land needed. Aurora donned her oilskin coat and hat, determined not to let the weather prevent her from keeping her appointment at the Twin Pea Ranch. The ride was damp, but not unpleasant, the countryside shrouded in a fine mist that softened its contours and lent an otherworldly quality to the familiar landscape. By the time she reached Nathan's property, the rain had lessened to a drizzle, and patches of blue sky were visible through breaks in the clouds. Nathan met her at the barn, taking Penny's reins as Aurora dismounted. "You didn't have to come in this weather," he said, though his smile betrayed his pleasure at seeing her. "It's just a little rain," Aurora replied, removing her wet hat and coat. "Besides, I promised to continue with the ledgers." They walked together to the house, their shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that sent a pleasant warmth through Aurora despite her damp clothes. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, a fire crackling in the sitting room hearth. "I have something to show you," Nathan said, leading her not to the study but to the sitting room. On the table near the fire lay a large, leather-bound book that Aurora hadn't seen before. "I found this when I was clearing out some things from the smokehouse yesterday." He opened the book to reveal a collection of pressed wildflowers, each carefully preserved and labeled in a neat, feminine hand. "These were my mother's," Nathan explained, his voice soft with memory. "She loved the wildflowers that grow around here. Every spring and summer, she would collect and press them, noting where and when she found each one." Aurora bent over the book, marveling at the delicate beauty of the preserved blooms. There were dozens of varieties, from tiny prairie stars to vibrant coneflowers, each with its own page and careful annotation. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "What a wonderful way to remember her." Nathan nodded, a fond smile touching his lips. "She taught me the names of all of them. We used to go on walks together, and she would point out each flower, telling me its proper name and any folklore associated with it." He turned a page to reveal a particularly lovely purple blossom. This one was her favorite pasque flower. "It's one of the first to bloom in spring, sometimes even when there's still snow on the ground." She said it was a reminder that life always finds a way, even in the harshest conditions. Aurora looked up at him, touched by the sharing of this personal memory. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Nathan agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "I think you would have liked her, and she would have liked you very much." The statement hung between them, laden with meaning that neither was quite ready to articulate. After a moment, Nathan closed the book carefully. "I thought you might enjoy seeing it," he said. "It seemed like something you would appreciate." "I do," Aurora assured him. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They moved to the study then, where Aurora continued her work on the ledgers while Nathan attended to correspondence at a small desk in the corner. The rain had stopped entirely by midday, allowing sunlight to stream through the windows and illuminate the room with a golden glow. They worked in companionable silence for several hours, interrupted only by occasional questions or observations. Aurora found herself stealing glances at Nathan when she thought he wasn't looking, admiring the strong line of his profile and the intent expression on his face as he focused on his letters. Once, she looked up to find him watching her, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Instead of looking away in embarrassment, Aurora held his gaze, returning his smile with one of her own. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither could deny. When it was time for Aurora to leave, Nathan walked her to where Penny was stabled, helping her saddle the mare with practiced efficiency. As Aurora prepared to mount, Nathan placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. "There's a social at the church this Saturday," he said, his voice slightly hesitant. "I mentioned it before, but I understand if you're not ready. Still, I thought I would ask again. Would you consider going with me?" Aurora hesitated only briefly. The thought of facing the entire town, of enduring their well-meaning condolences and curious glances, was daunting. But the prospect of spending the evening with Nathan, of taking this small step toward whatever was developing between them, outweighed her trepidation. "Yes," she said softly. "I would like that." The smile that lit Nathan's face was worth any discomfort she might face at the social. "I'll pick you up at 5 then," he said, his voice warm with pleasure. "It's nothing fancy, just food and music and conversation, but it might be nice to be among people again." Aurora nodded, understanding what he was trying to say. It was time for her to rejoin the community, to stop isolating herself in her grief. 5 o'clock on Saturday," she confirmed. "I'll be ready." As she rode home, Aurora felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation at the prospect of the social. It would be her first public appearance since her father's funeral, and she knew she would be the subject of much well-intentioned but potentially overwhelming attention. Yet the thought of going with Nathan, of having his steady presence beside her, made the prospect less intimidating. By the time Saturday arrived, Aurora had worked herself into a state of nervous anticipation. She spent the morning completing her chores with meticulous care, then devoted the afternoon to preparing herself for the social. She bathed thoroughly, washing her hair and letting it dry in the warm spring air before carefully arranging it in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid. The question of what to wear occupied much of her thoughts. Her wardrobe was limited and practical, with few concessions to fashion or frivolity. After much deliberation, she settled on her best dress, a deep green cotton with a modest lace collar that her mother had added before her death. It was simple by town standards but clean and well made, and the color complemented her eyes and chestnut hair. At precisely 5 o'clock, the sound of an approaching buggy drew Aurora to the window. Nathan had arrived driving a smart two-seater, pulled by a matched pair of bays. He had dressed for the occasion as well, wearing a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that Aurora hadn't seen before. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard, giving him a more polished appearance than his usual workday look. Aurora took a deep breath, steadying her nerves before stepping out onto the porch to greet him. The smile that lit Nathan's face when he saw her sent a warm flutter through her chest. "You look beautiful," he said simply, as he helped her into the buggy. "Thank you," Aurora replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." The drive to town was pleasant, the evening mild and clear with the scent of wildflowers carried on the gentle breeze. They talked easily as they rode, Nathan pointing out changes in the landscape since Aurora had last traveled this road. Aurora sharing memories of trips to town with her parents in years past. As they approached Willow Creek, Aurora felt her anxiety returning. The town was small, barely more than a main street with a handful of businesses, a church, and scattered houses, but it suddenly seemed dauntingly large and public after the solitude of her homestead. Nathan seemed to sense her unease. "We don't have to stay long," he assured her, his voice gentle. "Just long enough to show our faces and have some supper. If it becomes too much, just say the word and we'll leave." Aurora nodded gratefully, drawing strength from his understanding. "I'll be fine," she said, more to convince herself than him. "It's time I rejoined the world." The churchyard was already filled with people when they arrived. Tables had been set up on the grass, laden with food brought by the townspeople, and lanterns hung from tree branches to provide light as the evening progressed. A small group of musicians was setting up near the church steps, a fiddle player, a man with a guitar, and another with a harmonica. Nathan helped Aurora down from the buggy, then offered his arm as they approached the gathering. Aurora took it gratefully, drawing comfort from his solid presence beside her. The next hour passed in a blur of greetings and conversations. Nearly everyone present expressed condolences for her father's passing, some with genuine warmth and others with the awkward formality of those who are uncomfortable with grief. Aurora accepted their words with as much grace as she could muster, grateful for Nathan's steady presence at her side. Mrs. Grayson, the minister's wife, pressed a plate of food into Aurora's hands, insisting that she looked too thin and needed proper feeding. Dr. Peterson, who had attended her father in his final illness, inquired after her health with professional concern. Mr. Jenkins, the storekeeper, reminded her that she had credit at his establishment whenever she needed supplies. Through it all, Nathan remained close, his hand occasionally coming to rest at the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The simple touch grounded Aurora, reminding her that she was not facing these interactions alone. As the evening progressed and the initial awkwardness faded, Aurora found herself genuinely enjoying the gathering. The food was plentiful and good, the music lively, and there was a sense of community that she had almost forgotten during her weeks of isolation. When the musicians began playing in earnest, several couples moved to the cleared area in front of them to dance. Nathan turned to Aurora, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance?" he asked softly. Aurora hesitated. It had been years since she had danced with anyone other than her father, who had occasionally spun her around their cabin on winter evenings when the isolation became too much. But the music was inviting, and the warmth in Nathan's eyes impossible to resist. "I'd like that," she said, placing her hand in his outstretched one. Nathan led her to the makeshift dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while the other held hers. They moved together to the lively fiddle tune, a bit stiffly at first but with increasing ease as they found their rhythm together. Nathan was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her with confidence through the simple steps. As they danced, Aurora became aware of glances and whispers from those watching. Not unkind for the most part, but curious. Nathan Powell was well respected in the community but known to keep to himself socially. His obvious interest in the Walker girl was noteworthy gossip. "People are talking," Aurora murmured, keeping her smile in place for the benefit of onlookers. "Let them," Nathan replied, his voice low and meant only for her. "I'm not ashamed to be seen with the most beautiful woman at the social." The compliment brought a flush to Aurora's cheeks, but she couldn't deny the pleasure it gave her. It had been so long since anyone had made her feel beautiful or desirable. The sensation was both new and somehow familiar, like returning to a place she had forgotten she loved. They danced several more dances, stopping occasionally to rest and converse with others. As the evening wore on, Aurora found herself relaxing more fully, even laughing at a story told by the blacksmith's wife about her children's antics. It was during one such moment of laughter that the skies opened unexpectedly, a sudden summer shower catching the gathering by surprise. There was a moment of chaos as people grabbed food and instruments, seeking shelter under the church eaves or in the building itself. Nathan took Aurora's hand, pulling her not toward the church but toward their buggy. "Let's go," he said, a gleam of adventure in his eyes. "Unless you want to be trapped in the church with half the town for the next hour." Aurora shook her head, laughing as they ran through the rain to the waiting buggy. Nathan helped her up, then quickly untied the horses and climbed in beside her. He unfolded a lap blanket from beneath the seat, spreading it over their legs to provide some protection from the rain as they set off. The shower intensified as they left town, turning into a proper downpour that drummed on the buggy's canvas top and transformed the road into a muddy track. Despite the weather, or perhaps because of it, Aurora felt strangely exhilarated. There was something freeing about the rain, about the unexpected turn the evening had taken. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the rain. "You're getting soaked." Aurora turned to him, droplets of rain clinging to her eyelashes and sliding down her cheeks like tears. But unlike the day by her father's grave, these were not tears of sorrow. The rain felt cleansing somehow, washing away the last of her isolation and grief. "I'm fine," she said, a genuine smile lighting her face. "Better than fine, actually. I'm happy." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes dark with an emotion Aurora couldn't quite name. Then, with deliberate care, he guided the horses to the side of the road and brought them to a stop beneath the shelter of a large cottonwood tree. "Nathan?" Aurora questioned, confused by the sudden halt. Instead of answering, Nathan reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. With his thumb, he wiped away a raindrop that clung to the corner of her mouth, his touch lingering there. "You hid your tears in the rain once," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the patter of raindrops on the buggy top. "But I found your face then, and I find it now." Aurora's breath caught in her throat at the intensity in his gaze. "Nathan," she whispered, his name both a question and an answer. "I'll kiss away every storm, Aurora," he murmured, leaning closer, "if you'll let me." There was a moment of suspended time, a heartbeat of anticipation, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. Aurora closed her eyes, surrendering to the sensation of his mouth on hers, his hand still cradling her face as if she were something precious, something to be cherished. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the day I found you by your father's grave, he admitted, his voice low and intimate. I'm glad you waited, Aurora replied softly. I wasn't ready then. And now? Nathan asked, drawing back slightly to study her face. Aurora met his gaze steadily, feeling more certain than she had about anything in months. Now I am, she said simply. Nathan smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes and made Aurora's heart skip a beat. Good, he said, pressing another quick kiss to her lips before turning his attention back to the horses. Because I intend to do that again. Often. They continued the journey to Aurora's homestead in a companionable silence broken only by the sound of the rain, which had lessened to a gentle patter. Aurora's mind was whirling with the implications of what had just happened, with the potential future that now seemed to be opening before her. It was both thrilling and terrifying, this step into the unknown. When they reached her cabin, the rain had stopped entirely, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming in the moonlight that now broke through the dispersing clouds. Nathan helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. Would you like to come in? Aurora asked, the invitation simple but laden with meaning. Nathan nodded, tying the horses to the hitching post before following her onto the porch. In the doorway, he paused, reaching out to take her hand in his. Aurora, he said, his voice serious. I want you to know that I'm not taking this lightly. What's happening between us, it matters to me. You matter to me. Aurora squeezed his hand, touched by his earnestness. I know, she said softly. You matter to me too, Nathan, more than I expected, more than I was prepared for. They stood there for a moment, the magnitude of their admission hanging in the air between them. Then Aurora tugged gently on his hand, leading him into the cabin that had felt so empty since her father's death, but now seemed to fill with new possibilities. Inside, Aurora lit the lamps while Nathan built up the fire, their movements around each other as natural as if they had been doing this together for years. When the room was warm and well lit, they sat side by side on the small sofa, their shoulders touching. Tell me what you're thinking, Nathan said, his voice gentle in the quiet room. Aurora considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. I'm thinking that life is full of unexpected turns, she said finally. A month ago, I thought my future had ended with my father's death. I couldn't see past the grief, couldn't imagine what came next. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. And then you rode up in the rain and somehow everything changed. Nathan reached out to take her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. For me too, he admitted. I wasn't looking for this for you, but from that first moment there was something about you that called to me. Your strength, your grace in the face of loss, your determination to carry on despite everything. You're remarkable, Aurora Walker. Aurora ducked her head, unused to such praise. I'm just doing what needs to be done, she demurred. No, Nathan said firmly, using his free hand to gently tilt her face back up to his. It's more than that. Many people would have collapsed under the weight of what you've endured. But you keep going, keep working, keep living. That takes a special kind of courage. Aurora was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. What happens now? She asked finally, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate future. Nathan's expression turned thoughtful. That depends on what you want, he said carefully. I won't pretend that I don't have hopes, Aurora. I care for you deeply, and I believe what's growing between us could become something remarkable. But I also know that you're still finding your way after your father's death, still deciding what your future holds. I don't want to pressure you or rush you into anything you're not ready for. The honesty and consideration in his words touched Aurora deeply. How different he was from the few suitors who had approached her in years, past men who had seen her primarily as a potential helpmate, a practical addition to their households rather than a person with her own dreams and needs. I care for you too, Nathan, she said softly. More than I thought possible in such a short time, but you're right, I'm still finding my way. I need to know that I can stand on my own before I choose to stand with someone else. Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then that's what we'll do, he said simply. You'll continue to work on your homestead, and I'll continue to help when you'll let me. You'll keep organizing my ledgers, and I'll keep finding excuses to spend time with you." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "And perhaps, sometimes, I'll kiss you in the rain." Aurora laughed softly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "I think I'd like that," she admitted. Nathan's expression grew serious again. "I want you to know something, Aurora. Whatever you decide about your future, whether to keep the homestead or sell it, whether to stay in Willow Creek or seek opportunities elsewhere, I'll support your choice. Your independence matters to me because it matters to you." The simple declaration, so at odds with the expectations most men would have of a potential wife, confirmed what Aurora had begun to suspect. Nathan Powell was unlike any man she had ever known. He saw her as an equal, valued her strength rather than finding it threatening, and understood her need to stand on her own before choosing to join her life with another's. "Thank you," she said softly, leaning forward to press a gentle kiss to his cheek. "For understanding, for being patient. For seeing me as I am." Nathan turned his head slightly, capturing her lips with his in a kiss that was both tender and filled with promise. When they parted, he smiled that warm, genuine smile that made her heart flutter. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late, and we both have early mornings tomorrow." Aurora nodded, though part of her wished he could stay not for anything improper, but simply to prolong this newfound closeness between them. "Will I see you soon?" she asked, walking with him to the door. Nathan paused on the threshold, looking down at her with warmth in his eyes. "I was thinking of riding over on Tuesday to help with that fence you mentioned needed mending," he said. "If that suits you." "It suits me very well," Aurora replied with a smile. Nathan bent to kiss her once more, a brief, sweet gesture that felt like a promise. "Good night, Aurora," he said softly. "Dream well." As she watched him drive away, the buggy a dark silhouette against the moonlit landscape, Aurora wrapped her arms around herself, holding the warmth of the evening close. For the first time since her father's death, the future seemed not just bearable, but full of possibility, like a door opening onto a landscape she had never imagined, but now longed to explore. The days that followed took on a new rhythm, a pattern of work and companionship that brought Aurora an increasing sense of stability and hope. True to his word, Nathan came on Tuesday to help mend the fence, staying afterward for supper. On Wednesday, Aurora rode to the Twin P to work on the ledgers, now nearly completed to her satisfaction. Friday brought Nathan back to her homestead with a gift seedlings for a small herb garden that they planted together near her kitchen door. Each meeting deepened their connection, their conversations ranging from practical matters of ranch management to philosophical discussions of books they had both read, from childhood memories to tentative dreams for the future. And each meeting included moments of physical closeness, hands touching as they worked side by side, stolen kisses in the shadow of the barn, embraces that grew increasingly difficult to end. By the time June gave way to July, bringing with it the full heat of summer, Aurora had settled into a new normal. Her grief for her father had not disappeared. She still visited his grave weekly, still found herself reaching for him in moments of uncertainty, but it had softened, becoming a bittersweet ache rather than a consuming pain. The homestead was thriving under her care, the garden producing abundantly, the animals healthy and content. The extra income from her work at the Twin P had allowed her to hire occasional help for the heavier tasks, and Nathan's willing assistance with projects beyond her physical strength meant that nothing essential went undone. Aurora was pruning the tomato plants one warm afternoon when the sound of an approaching buggy caught her attention. Shading her eyes against the sun, she was surprised to see not Nathan's familiar rig, but a vehicle she didn't recognize. As it drew closer, she made out the figure of Elijah Thompson, the banker from Willow Creek, driving with his usual precision. Wiping her hands on her apron, Aurora moved to greet him as he pulled up in front of the cabin. Thompson was a thin, precise man in his 50s, known for his fairness but also for his strict adherence to business principles. "Miss Walker," he greeted her, doffing his hat politely as he stepped down from the buggy. "I hope I find you well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Thompson," Aurora replied, wondering what had brought the banker all the way out to her homestead. "Would you care to come inside out of the sun? I can offer you some lemonade." Thompson accepted the invitation with a nod, following Aurora into the cabin where the thick walls kept the interior relatively cool despite the summer heat. He seated himself at the kitchen table while Aurora fetched the lemonade, his expression thoughtful as he glanced around the modest but well-kept space. "I've come on a matter of business, Miss Walker," he said as she placed a glass before him. "As you know, your father had a small mortgage on this property with our bank." Aurora nodded, a flicker of anxiety passing through her. The mortgage payments were among the obligations she had been most concerned about after her father's death, but with careful management and her income from the Twin P, she had managed to keep them current. "There's no problem with the payments," Thompson assured her, seeming to read her concern. "In fact, that's partly why I'm here. You've been most diligent about meeting your obligations, which is commendable." "Thank you," Aurora said, relaxing slightly. "I've been fortunate to find additional work that helps make ends meet." Thompson nodded, taking a sip of lemonade before continuing. "Yes, I understand you've been helping Nathan Powell with his books. A good arrangement for both of you, I imagine." There was a knowing glint in his eye that suggested he, like everyone else in Willow Creek, was aware of the developing relationship between Aurora and the rancher. "It has been," Aurora agreed, choosing not to address the implication. "Well, to the point of my visit," Thompson continued, setting down his glass. "A gentleman from Denver has been inquiring about properties in this area. He represents a mining company that believes there may be copper deposits in these hills. They're looking to acquire land for exploration and possible development." Aurora frowned slightly, not seeing the connection to her homestead. "I'm not sure I understand why you're telling me this, Mr. Thompson." The banker leaned forward slightly. "The company is offering very generous terms for properties in this specific area, Miss Walker. Your homestead is of particular interest to them due to its location. They've authorized me to offer you 3 times the current market value for the land." Aurora stared at him, stunned by the unexpected proposal. 3 times the market value, she repeated, trying to process what that would mean in practical terms. It would be enough to pay off the mortgage and leave her with a substantial sum enough to start fresh somewhere else, perhaps even to realize that long-ago dream of seeing San Francisco. "It's an exceptional offer," Thompson confirmed. "One that I, as your financial advisor, would normally encourage you to accept without hesitation." He paused, studying her face. "However, I'm aware that this land has sentimental value for you. Your parents are buried here after all." Aurora nodded, her thoughts racing. The offer was indeed exceptional, a financial opportunity that might never come again. And yet, the thought of selling the homestead, of leaving the land her parents had worked so hard to tame, of abandoning their graves to strangers, it tore at her heart. "I would need time to consider this," she said finally. "It's not a decision I can make lightly." Thompson nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her response. "Of course. The company has given me authorization to keep the offer open for 2 weeks. That should give you adequate time for reflection." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a folded document. "Here are the details of the offer in writing. I encourage you to review them carefully." Aurora accepted the document, placing it on the table without opening it. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Thompson." The banker rose, preparing to take his leave. "It's a significant opportunity, Miss Walker," he said, his tone more personal than it had been thus far. "But I understand that some decisions involve more than financial considerations. Take the time you need." After Thompson had departed, Aurora sat at the table for a long time, the unopened offer before her like a challenge. Part of her was tempted to burn it without reading it, to reject outright the idea of selling her family's land. But the practical side of her, the side her father had nurtured, knew she should at least consider what such a sale might mean for her future. Eventually, she opened the document and read through the terms. The offer was indeed generous, even more so than Thompson had indicated verbally. In addition to the purchase price, the company was offering to cover all closing costs and to allow her to remain on the property for up to 6 months after the sale, if she needed time to make arrangements for relocation. It was, by any objective measure, an excellent proposition. But as Aurora folded the paper and put it away, she knew that this decision would not be made on objective measures alone. Her heart was involved, her heart, and now Nathan's as well. That evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Aurora made her way to the small family cemetery on the hill. She knelt between her parents' graves, running her fingers over the simple markers as she had so many times before. "What should I do?" she asked softly, knowing there would be no answer but finding comfort in the ritual of consultation nonetheless. "This land was your dream, your life's work, but you always taught me to be practical, to look toward the future rather than cling to the past." The only response was the gentle rustling of grass in the evening breeze and the distant call of a meadowlark. Aurora sat in silence for a long time, watching as the golden light of sunset bathed the landscape in a warm glow, highlighting the contours of the land her parents had loved. As darkness began to fall, Aurora rose, her decision not yet made but her heart somewhat lighter. Whatever she chose, she would make the decision based on what was right for her future, not solely out of loyalty to the past. Her parents, she believed, would have wanted that for her. The next day, Aurora rode to the Twin Pea Ranch earlier than usual, hoping to speak with Nathan before beginning her work on the ledgers. She found him in the barn, discussing the day's tasks with his foreman. When he saw her, his face lit with a smile that made her heart skip despite the serious matter on her mind. "You're early," he observed, excusing himself from the conversation to join her. "Not that I'm complaining." Aurora returned his smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "Something important." Nathan's expression grew serious as he noted her demeanor. "Of course," he said, gesturing toward the house. "Let's go inside where we can talk privately." In the sitting room, Aurora declined his offer of coffee, too agitated to think of refreshments. Instead, she pulled Thompson's offer from her pocket and handed it to Nathan without preamble. "The banker brought this yesterday," she explained as Nathan unfolded the document. "A mining company wants to buy my homestead. They think there might be copper in the hills." Nathan read through the offer, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes were serious but calm. "This is a substantial offer," he said, stating the obvious but giving no indication of his opinion on the matter. "It is," Aurora agreed, watching his face carefully. "More money than I ever expected to have, enough to start fresh somewhere else. To have choices I never thought would be available to me." Nathan was silent for a moment, seeming to choose his words with care. "What are you thinking?" he asked finally. "Are you considering accepting?" Aurora paced to the window, looking out at the ranch that had become almost as familiar to her as her own homestead over the past months. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me rejects the idea immediately. How could I sell the land my parents worked so hard for, the place where they're buried? But another part of me wonders if this isn't an opportunity I would be foolish to refuse." She turned back to face him, her expression troubled. "And then there's us, Nathan, what we've been building between us. How does that factor into this decision?" Nathan set the offer aside and crossed the room to stand before her. With gentle hands, he took her shoulders, his touch warm and steadying. "Aurora," he said softly, "I meant what I said before. Whatever you decide about your future, I'll support you. Your independence matters to me." "But what if I decided to accept this offer?" Aurora pressed, needing to understand the full implications. "What if I decided to leave Willow Creek, to go to San Francisco or Denver or somewhere else entirely?" A flash of pain crossed Nathan's features, but his voice remained steady. "Then I would miss you terribly," he said honestly. "But I would still support your decision. Your happiness matters to me more than my own preferences." Aurora searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his expression. "And if I stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I decide to keep the homestead," a small smile touched Nathan's lips, though his eyes remained serious. "Then I would be selfishly glad," he admitted. "Because I love you, Aurora Walker, and having you near would make my heart lighter. But I would still want to know that you had made the choice for yourself, not for me or anyone else." The simple declaration, "I love you," spoken so naturally, as if it were a fact as obvious as the sun rising, nearly took Aurora's breath away. They had been moving toward this, she knew, in every shared glance and touch, in every conversation and moment of companionable silence. But hearing the words spoken aloud, in Nathan's deep, sincere voice, made her heart swell with a joy she had almost forgotten was possible. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily now that he had opened the door. "I think I have for longer than I've been willing to admit to myself." Nathan's hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "Then know this," he said softly. "My love doesn't depend on where you live or what you decide about the homestead. It's yours, regardless of whether you're across the creek or across the country." Tears welled in Aurora's eyes at the depth of understanding and acceptance in his words. This was what had drawn her to Nathan from the beginning, not just his kindness or his strength, but his fundamental respect for her as a person with her own mind and will. "I need time to think," she said, leaning into his touch. "To be sure that whatever I decide, I'm doing it for the right reasons." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here." The 2 weeks Thompson had given her for consideration passed in a blur of introspection and practical assessment. Aurora spent long hours walking her property, remembering the years spent there with her parents, imagining possible futures both on and off the land. She visited her parents' graves daily, seeking connection and clarity. She reviewed the homestead's financial records, trying to project its long-term viability as a working farm. She even rode into Willow Creek to speak with Thompson again, clarifying certain aspects of the offer and discussing potential investments if she were to accept it. Throughout this period of deliberation, Nathan maintained a supportive presence without applying pressure. He continued to visit, to help with projects around the homestead, to share meals and conversations and increasingly passionate embraces. But he never asked about her decision, never attempted to influence her one way or the other. It was this very restraint, this respect for her autonomy, that ultimately helped Aurora reach her conclusion. On the final day before she was to give Thompson her answer, she rode to the Twin Pea Ranch unannounced, finding Nathan in the corral working with a young colt. He looked up as she approached, a smile lighting his face despite the sweat and dust that covered him after hours of work. "This is a pleasant surprise," he said, turning the colt over to a ranch hand and climbing the fence to join her. "I've made my decision," Aurora said without preamble, her voice calm and clear, "about the offer." Nathan's expression grew serious, though he gave no indication of anxiety or expectation. "I'm listening," he said simply. Aurora took a deep breath, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm going to refuse it," she said. "I'm keeping the homestead," a flicker of something relief. Joy passed through Nathan's eyes, but he kept his response measured. "May I ask what led you to that decision?" "Many things," Aurora replied, walking with him toward the shade of a nearby tree where they could talk more comfortably. "The practical aspects, for one. The homestead is becoming more viable each month as I learn and adapt. With the income from working for you, I can manage the mortgage payments comfortably. And while the mining company's offer is generous, there's no guarantee that they would find what they're looking for. If they didn't, the land might be left damaged and less valuable than it is now." Nathan nodded, listening attentively as she continued. "Then there are the emotional considerations," Aurora said more softly. "My parents are buried there. Their dreams and work are embedded in every acre. Selling would mean abandoning that legacy, and I'm not ready to do that." They reached the tree, and Aurora turned to face Nathan directly. "But most importantly," she said, her voice steady and sure, "I've realized that I don't need to leave to find what I'm looking for. The future I want is already here, taking shape day by day, here in Willow Creek, here with you." The control Nathan had been maintaining slipped at her words, a smile breaking across his face like sunlight through clouds. "Aurora," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "Are you certain?" "I don't want you to have regrets." Aurora nodded, stepping closer to him. "I'm certain," she said softly. "The offer made me evaluate what I truly want, what would bring me fulfillment and happiness. And the answer is this: my homestead, my independence, and you, Nathan Powell." All three, not one at the expense of the others. Nathan reached for her then, drawing her into his arms with a reverence that made her heart swell. I love you, he murmured against her hair, and I'm selfishly, enormously glad that you're staying. Aurora laughed softly, wrapping her arms around his waist and feeling the solid strength of him against her. I thought you might be, she teased gently. Nathan drew back slightly, his expression growing serious again. Aurora, he said, his voice low and intent. There's something I've been wanting to ask you, but I was waiting until you had made this decision, whatever it might be. Aurora's heart quickened at his tone, a suspicion forming in her mind that both thrilled and frightened her. What is it? She asked softly. Instead of answering immediately, Nathan took her hand and led her toward the house. Inside, he guided her to the study where she had spent so many hours working on his ledgers. But instead of going to the desk, he moved to a small cabinet in the corner, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. From inside, he withdrew a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers that Aurora recognized immediately from his mother's pressed flower collection. With careful hands, Nathan opened the box to reveal a ring nestled on a bed of velvet, a simple but elegant design with a small diamond set between two sapphires. This was my mother's, Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. My father gave it to her when he asked her to marry him. Before she died, she gave it to me, telling me to offer it only to a woman who was her equal in strength and character. He looked up, meeting Aurora's gaze with unwavering certainty. I've found that woman in you. Aurora's breath caught in her throat as Nathan took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Aurora Walker, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I love you with all that I am. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need me or I need you, but because together, we could build something even stronger than what we could create separately. Tears filled Aurora's eyes, not tears of grief this time, but of joy so intense it was almost painful. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking on the single syllable. Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. With hands that trembled slightly, Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her, the sapphires catching the light with a deep blue glow that reminded Aurora of the summer sky. It's beautiful, she said softly, looking down at the ring that now symbolized their commitment to each other. Like you, Nathan replied, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her fingers just above the ring. My mother would have been proud to see you wearing it. Aurora stepped into his embrace then, tilting her face up for his kiss. Their lips met in a seal of their promise, a kiss that spoke of shared dreams and a future built together. Step by step, day by day, when they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Nathan kept his arms around her waist, unwilling to let her go just yet. When? He asked simply. When would you like to be married? Aurora considered the question, practical concerns mixing with the joy of the moment. Not too long, she decided. Perhaps early autumn after the harvest. That would give us time to make arrangements and the weather would still be fair. Nathan nodded, his smile widening. Autumn it is, he agreed. And after? Would you prefer to live at the Twin P or would you rather stay at your homestead, at least for a while? The question touched Aurora deeply, another evidence of Nathan's respect for her attachment to her parents' land. I think, she said slowly, thinking it through, that I would like to divide our time at first. Perhaps spend part of the week at each place while we decide what makes the most sense long-term. A wise compromise, Nathan approved, and practical too since both properties will need attention. They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing plans and possibilities, their excitement growing as they shared ideas for their shared future. When it was time for Aurora to return to her homestead, Nathan insisted on riding with her, unwilling to part from her just yet. As they approached the small cemetery on the hill, Aurora reined in her horse. Would you mind if we stopped for a moment? She asked. I'd like to tell my parents about us. Nathan's expression softened with understanding. Of course, he said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. Together they walked to the graves, Aurora kneeling between them while Nathan stood respectfully nearby. Ma, Pa, she said softly, her fingers tracing the letters carved into the simple markers. I wanted you to know that I'm getting married. To Nathan Powell, the man who found me in the rain that day after you died, Pa. The man who helped me find my way back to living." She looked up at Nathan, who stepped forward to stand beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "He's a good man," Aurora continued, turning back to the graves. "Kind and strong and respectful. You would approve of him, I think, and I love him very much." Nathan knelt beside her then, his voice low but clear as he addressed the graves. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," he said formally, "I want you to know that I will cherish your daughter for all the days of my life. I will protect her without stifling her independence, support her dreams as well as my own, and love her with all the strength and constancy I possess. You have my solemn promise." Tears filled Aurora's eyes at the simple, heartfelt pledge. She reached for Nathan's hand, finding it waiting for hers, their fingers intertwining in a tangible symbol of their connection. They remained there for a few moments in silent communion, the evening breeze rustling through the grass around them. Then, by mutual unspoken agreement, they rose and returned to their horses. As they rode the final distance to Aurora's cabin, the setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, painting the hills and valleys in hues of gold and amber. Aurora looked around at the land her parents had loved, at the homestead she had chosen to keep, and felt a deep sense of rightness settle in her heart. She had hidden her tears in the rain once, lost in grief too overwhelming to bear alone. But Nathan had found her, had seen beyond the sorrow to the strength beneath, had offered not just comfort but partnership. And now, together, they would face whatever storms might come, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other not just love, but home. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Nathan drew Aurora close against his side. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. Aurora looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a relatively short time. "Yes," she said simply, the single word carrying the weight of all she felt. "Happier than I thought possible again." Nathan pressed a kiss to her forehead, his arms tightening around her. "Good," he murmured, "because making you happy is what I intend to do for the rest of our lives." As if to punctuate his words, a soft patter of rain began to fall, gentle drops that barely disturbed the dust of the yard. Aurora tilted her face up to the sky, feeling the cool touch of raindrops on her skin. "Look," she said with a smile, turning back to Nathan. "It's raining again." Nathan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the moisture on her cheeks. "Then I believe I made you a promise," he said, his voice low and tender. "Something about kissing away every storm." And as his lips met hers in the gentle rain, Aurora knew with absolute certainty that whatever weather life might bring, they would weather it together through sunshine and storm, through joy and sorrow, through all the seasons of the life they would build as one.